Now, in the late 1800s, there is a man in France who's a speech teacher. His name was Francois Delsarte. Francois Delsarte. Delsarte taught elocution. All that means is he taught speech. But he became very interested in gestures. He studied gestures, and he felt gestures were a way to reach the truth of the heart or the truth of the soul. And what he began to do, and what he's famous for, is he cataloged gestures. In other words, he went around and he watched people in real life, and he watched how they gestured when they felt an emotion. And he put all these in books. And he got the idea that this would be a way to teach actors. Not just to teach speech, but to really teach actors. So that if actors learned their gestures, no matter what language you were speaking in, audiences would be able to follow the story because everyone would use the same gestures for the emotions. And acting schools spring up around the world teaching Delsarte's system of acting. And this is the first real time that we really get acting schools. Now, I'd like you to see some of this because Delsarte, you see a lot of his gestures if you go back and you watch silent movies. Because the actors who were in silent movies, a lot of them studied Delsarte. And they use those gestures in the movies. Now, what makes it bad is, on film, these gestures are way too big. So what happens is, they look a little phony. But they worked really well in a time when melodrama was the main thing that was being performed on stage. Shakespeare and melodramas were very, very popular, and his gestures worked for them. Now, for example, fear. This is fear. If something scares you, you pull back from it, your eyes get real wide, and your hands will come up to block whatever's coming at you. And so, with Delsarte, fear. Fear. Now, if you were an actor in that time period, you would learn all your gestures. You would learn fear. And then you'd learn, after fear, there's terror. Now, terror is worse than fear. You become so afraid, you can't look at what's coming after you. So we go from fear to terror. Huh. Fear, terror. Huh. And he had gestures for everything. Adoration, I love adoration. When you love someone from afar, you adore them. Adoration. I hope you're giving me some love back here on this. Adoration. One of my favorite ones, he said, if you're so disgusted by someone, you just want to, something so disgusting, you just want to purge it. And he called it phlegm. Now, I think it's very close to constipation, but he called that phlegm. Again, this was a way to train actors, and it takes off, and it's used across the country. Schools are developed to teach acting, to teach Delsarte. By the end of the 19th century, the Romantic period ends, and we enter a new period called realism. And there are two dominant forms of realism that take off at the beginning of the 20th century. And one is naturalism. Now, in naturalism, everything is totally real. This art form didn't last very long because people didn't like it. In theater, for example, there was a play about the evils that go on in the meat industry. And the play took place at a butcher shop. And they actually constructed on stage a butcher shop which included live real meat hanging on the stage, covered with flies. I mean, it was disgusting. But that's what they believed, that it had to be just perfectly real. And that died out. Realism becomes the dominant form, and it's still with us today, and it still is the dominant form today. In realism, we select what we want the audience to see, and whatever we select is real in the audience's mind. In other words, we don't have to build a real butcher shop. We can build scenery out of muslin flats, but they'll be painted to look real. Therefore, we are selecting what we want them to see. But the acting is real. It's like real life. This came about some playwrights, and two of the most famous of these were Ibsen, who was from Sweden. He lived from 1828 to 1906. And the other one was Anton Chekhov. Now, Chekhov was Russian. He was with us from 1860 to 1904. When these guys began writing plays, realistic plays, it changed theater totally. We now needed to move from a romantic style of acting, a melodramatic style of acting, the acting of Delsarte, to something more natural, something real. Because the plays just don't work. If I'm doing Ibsen, one of my favorite Ibsen plays is about a doctor in a small town. And the baths, they have healing waters in the town. They have these baths. And they discover there's something in the water making people sick. And the doctor asks the town council to close the baths. Well, they decide not to do this because it would cost too much money. And they destroy this man. They destroy his reputation so that no one will believe him, just to keep those baths open. And with a story like that, you can't be doing the gestures. They don't work. So a couple things happen. First, in Germany, there is a duke, and his name is George II. And he's the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen. George II, the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen. George II was not an actor, he was not a playwright, but he loved theater, and he was wealthy, he had a lot of money. And he formed his own theater company. And his idea was this: for the first time, he would be the director. He would sit out in the audience, in the house, and he would tell everyone else what to do. No longer would there be a star. What would happen is they would do plays in repertory, several plays at a time. One actor would be the star in one show and then may play a servant in the next. They would switch because all the actors would be very good. And he also, for the first time, told the designers what they had to do. See, up until this time, actors wore pretty much what they owned. Every actor provided their own costume. Well, not with George II. What he said was there would be a costume designer. All the costumes would help tell that story, and they'd be created by the costume designer and approved by him. He also, one of the other things he did was, for the first time, they had sets that were built for that specific show. Up until then, if a play took place inside a house, they would have a generic interior set. Now the sets were built for a specific show. And he was in control of everything. Well, when the Meiningen players traveled around Europe, they were a sensation. No one had ever seen anything this good. And there was an actor in Russia who got to see them. His name was Konstantin Stanislavski. Stanislavski was an actor, and he had loved theater since he was a child. But when he saw the Meiningen players, he decided that he wanted to form a company like that in Russia. And he, along with some other people, formed the Moscow Art Theater. The Moscow Art Theater is still with us. It's one of the most famous theaters in the world. And Stanislavski did something phenomenal. He created an acting school tied to the Moscow Art Theater. And at that acting school, he taught realistic acting style. That style would evolve over the years. He would try many different things, but he created a system of acting, and we call it a system of acting that is still used today, and it's what you're going to be learning in this class. I teach the Stanislavski system of acting, as do every other professor here at this school. Almost everyone in the country teaches Stanislavski to this day. They might not teach the entire system, but they all teach some part of it. And there are many good acting teachers out there, each teaching what they think best helps an actor to be great. And there is no exception. All of them are some form of Stanislavski, even to this day. Now, Stanislavski is credited for writing 3 books on acting. He actually, they were not published during his lifetime. These books came out later, after he was dead, and they were put together by his students. And when you read them, they are a little hard to follow, because when his students found them, they were still in note form, and they pretty much decided this material would go with this book, this material would go with that book, and all 3 books were then published. That is why, for this, when I teach acting, I look at other books that explain the system, because they're just a little easier to follow. And then once you have an understanding of what Stanislavski was trying to teach, then you can go back and his books make a lot of sense. But those 3 books are An Actor Prepares, Building a Character, and Creating a Role. Well, I think that's about all I'm going to cover for today. In our next lecture, we're going to be talking about the Stanislavski system of acting.